Hello world, good afternoon, namaste and Nisam Bulavinaka from Sydney, Australia. I am Sashi Singh and welcome to Sashi Singh's Talking Point once again. In today's program, we will soon be speaking to our chief guest, Mr. Felix Anthony, former senator and member of the House of Representatives in Fiji and the current General Secretary of the National Union of Workers and the National Secretary of the Fiji Trades Union Congress, the FTUC. Dona Kirkerialuvinaka, and I seek your assistance. May I please request that you share the SSTP page on your own timelines so that we may share the interview with Mr. Anthony with as many people as possible this afternoon. To ensure that you receive instant notifications for all future programs, please like the SSTP page and press that blue follow button so you will never miss out on notifications, messages, trailers, and the actual program itself. As we get ready to start, welcome once again to the Thinking People's program, Sashi Singh's Talking Point, live on Facebook. To begin our program today, it is my pleasure to welcome our regular contributor, former Fiji TV journalist Nikhil Singh, to tell us of the key happenings of the political week in Fiji and in Australia. Nikhil, welcome to episode 9 and a very good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon to you, Sashi.
I hope you are well.
I indeed am, and trust you are well as well.
Well, raring to go. I'm really looking forward to the interview with our union man, Mr. Felix Anthony. But to begin with first, firstly to Fiji. I guess the big news, Nikhil, is the High Court case action brought by the former Solicitor General, who was sacked by the country's former president in November last year. The former Solicitor General is now challenging the sacking in court. Some very interesting revelations have come out in court. What is the latest with regards to that?
So actually, this case was called on Friday last week before High Court Judge Justice Dipti Amara Tunga. If one is to follow the origins of this matter, it goes back to July last year when the Supervisor of Elections, Mohammed Sanim, had removed Member of Parliament Nikhil Nawaikula's name from the National Register of Voters over matters relating to his name used on his voter card and his birth certificate. The action taken by the Supervisor of Elections meant that Nawaikula's seat was declared vacant. Nawaikula then took the Supervisor of Elections to court. The outcome of that was that the Chief Justice ruled that the actions of the Supervisor of Elections were unlawful and wrong. Nawaikula subsequently was reinstated as a Member of Parliament. Now, the Solicitor General at the time, Sarvada Sharma, had represented the Supervisor of Elections. It was after the ruling against the Supervisor of Elections that Mr. Sarvada Sharma was initially suspended and then sacked by the then president in November on allegations of misbehavior. So actually, this decision attracted a lot of controversy and criticism. For example, the Fiji Law Society on the 12th of November last year stated this, and I quote, "The termination of Mr. Sharma's appointment without due process being afforded to him is a grave assault on the rule of law and threatens the independence of critical constitutional officers. We are also concerned that the removal may be unlawful." So this, as the case entered the court on Friday, you referenced revelations. It was revealed in court on Friday that the Supervisor of Elections had in fact filed a complaint against Mr. Sharma following the court challenge by Nawaikula. Other interesting revelations, Sashi, Sharma's lawyer John Abdid, in his submission, stated that Sharma had been summoned to the Prime Minister's office, where he was given a pre-prepared resignation letter by the Prime Minister, and he was asked to sign that letter. Sharma refused to sign this, and on his way out of the PM's office, security guards confiscated his phone, and later the same was done to his laptop when he went back to his office at the AG's chambers. Sashi, the crux of this matter then is that Sharmada Sharma is arguing that the president cannot dismiss him without an independent tribunal hearing allegations and advising the president. That has not happened. There is a complaint that is lodged, not heard by a tribunal, and his employment was terminated. He is challenging that.
Well, Nikhil, interesting times indeed. The amazing thing is it took something like 3 months to the start of the court case for us to find out where the initial complaint came from. Still staying in Fiji, we've learned last week that the Fijian government has been taken to court as well, and 2 cases have been filed against the Bainimarama regime. What is the score on that front?
Indeed, an interesting development again in relation to constitutional challenges. Sashi, the Fiji Labour Party and Unity Fiji have filed 2 cases against the government, the first of which relates to changes to the Political Parties Act. The changes remove the right of any political party or candidate to appeal to the High Court against the decisions of the Registrar of Political Parties. Labour leader Mahendra Chaudhry and Unity Fiji leader Savanatha Narumbe, both of whom have been on your program as guests, Sashi, say the changes are unconstitutional. They said they believe that by removing the right of political parties to access the courts in such cases is unconstitutional, and they are seeking to have that right restored. In the second case, the 2 parties are taking the Constitutional Officers Commission to court in a matter relating to the Supervisor of Elections, Mohammed Sunim. In August last year, leaders of 5 political parties, the other 3 being Sodelpa, National Federation Party, and Freedom Alliance, they had written to the Constitutional Officers Commission calling for a tribunal to be appointed to investigate allegations of misbehavior against the Supervisor of Elections. The parties claim the Commission has not responded despite repeated reminders, so the parties are now seeking the assistance of the court, Sashi.
Coming closer to home, turning to what's been making the news here in Australia, Nikhil, the federal parliament is now on a break as they concluded 2 weeks of sitting last week. There has been a lot reported on the issue of national security. Wouldn't you agree?
Definitely, Sashi. Well, you can say the gloves were truly off in Canberra last week, but the debates and argument between the opposition and the Morrison government, particularly last week, appear to have crossed the line. There have always been a bipartisan approach on matters of national security, but the Liberals have been accused of weaponizing national security. Morrison and his ministers have been attacking the opposition, saying the opposition leader is China's candidate for the upcoming federal elections. Morrison called an opposition frontbencher a quote, a Manchurian candidate, which he was asked to withdraw in Parliament by the Speaker. But Albanese a day or 2 later called Morrison the real Manchurian candidate. Um, Albanese pointed out in Parliament that the Morrison government weaponizing national security is putting the country at risk, and China being the center of this debate, it's China that is getting the advantage of the sparring between the opposition and the government. Now, the boss of Australia's agency, ASIO, gave a very rare television interview on Wednesday night in which he said it was not helpful to politicize national security, by default, urging parties to stop using national security as a political football. Such a parliament won't be back until the last week of March. That's when Morrison will deliver his budget, and we assume that it'll be the last sitting before we head to polls in May. So a very brutal week in Canberra, but we do have a bit of respite with the break.
All right, and COVID restrictions are being eased in New South Wales, and Western Australia's hardline border restrictions, I believe, are also set to end soon. Your summary on these developments, Nikhil?
So very quickly, Sashi, there have been some relaxation or easement of restrictions from Friday last week. There are in New South Wales. There are no density limits, as previously it was one person bed per 2 square meter for hospitality venues. Or there will be no QR check-ins. It will be only required for nightclubs and for all music festivals with more than 1,000 people. Hospitals, aged care, and disability facilities may use their existing systems for recording visitors. Singing and dancing will be permitted at all venues except music festivals where singing and dancing can recommence from next week. So, Sachi, you'll be quite happy to know singing and dancing will be permitted at all venues. The recommendation to work from home will change and be returned to the employer's discretion. Now, these are first sort of tranche of rules that are being relaxed, that has already been relaxed from last week. But from Friday, the 25th of February, masks will only be mandated on public transport, planes, and indoors at airports, hospitals, and aged and disability care facilities, corrections facilities, and indoor music festivals with more than 1,000 people. Masks are encouraged for indoor settings. Each state government agency will review where it may be appropriate for public-facing staff to wear masks. The 20,000 person cap on music festivals will be removed. So these are some of the changes that are coming into effect. Some have already come into effect, as I mentioned. Some will take effect from the 25th of February. Hotel quarantine for unvaccinated returning travelers will be reduced from 14 days to 7 days from tomorrow. Now, if you across the country to Western Australia, I think a lot of people waiting for this. The Western Australia's hard border will finally come down in March, allowing the state to finally reopen to the rest of the country. Their Premier Mike McGowan announced the border will reopen just after midnight on the 3rd of March, allowing quarantine-free travel across the border for people triple dosed with the COVID-19 vaccine.
Nikhil Singh, thank you very much for your contribution this afternoon. We look forward to seeing you again next week. Have a safe and blessed week. And thank you for all your support this week as well, behind the scenes.
Thank you, Sashi. I really look forward to watching and listening to the conversation with Felix Anthony, indeed the workers' champion, who has always stood up for the workers in Fiji. I will certainly look forward to that program.
Thank you, Nikhil. See you next week. And I have not done this in the program as yet, but some of our very dedicated and followers, I just want to say hello and good morning to them, or rather good afternoon. Naresh Kumar is watching, Rakesh and Saras Prasad, Chandra Segran, Pramila Fries, Rajendra Lal, Madhur Singh, Shalendra Prasad, Peg Swaroop, Satish Deb, Judy Narayan from USA, Epi Turner, Bulavinaka from Bay of Ireland, Nisam Bulavinaka Kemini, Anudas, Kiran Ram Rakha is watching as well, and Ilyasa Vevambalu, Pushpa Kuni, Praveen Sharan, Liliana Wangalevu. Thank you, Liliana, for your kind comments. There's many, many more. Isaac Rounds, for instance, Sunitra Mishra. Thank you very much for all your support on Sashi Singh's Talking Point. And you are indeed watching Sashi Singh's Talking Point on Facebook Live. As I said last week here on SSTP, we ask the questions that Fijians all over the world want answers to. Fijians want to know. Now it's time to meet our chief guest. Our chief guest has been in the trade union movement for almost 40 years. He is currently the General Secretary of the National Union of Workers, formerly known as the Fiji Sugar and General Workers Union, as well as the National Secretary of the Fiji Trades Union Congress since 1999. Our chief guest is also the President of the International Trade Union Confederation, Asia Pacific, and Executive Committee member of the same movement, International Trade Union Confederation, ITUC. He was appointed to the Fiji Senate in 2002 and was elected to the House of Representatives in 2006. He has been appointed a board member of many boards and committees, and this afternoon, in a one-to-one interview with Mr. Felix Anthony, we will discuss his involvement with the union movement, the state of the trade unions in Fiji, plight of workers, government's take on workers' rights, discussion on fundamental human rights, and many other prevalent issues affecting Fiji currently. It is now my pleasure to welcome on Sashi Singh's Talking Point this afternoon my chief guest, Mr. Felix Anthony. Good afternoon, namaste, Nisam Bulavinaka to you, Felix.
Good afternoon, Sashi, and thank you for having me on your show.
It's been my pleasure, and thank you for accepting my invitation. There's a number of people that I normally try to invite. Some are very reluctant, but you were very, very forthcoming. So once again, welcome, and I thank you. Now, let me disclose this. I have known our chief guest for many, many, many years, going back to the good old Waiavi, or some call it Waihevi, days in Lautoka. Felix, as I've done previously in these programs, I always begin by asking a person his or her background. Now, your early schooling, where did you achieve your early schooling?
Well, before I answer that, Sashi, it's always good to know a former Waiavi boy interviewing another Waiavi boy. That's, it's really good. Well, Sashi, my schooling days, we started off in St. Anthony's Kindergarten School, of course, and then, of course, to St. Thomas Primary School, where you were as well. And
yes.
I recall you were the goalkeeper for the St. Thomas soccer team as well in those
yes,
days.
Yes, indeed.
And, of course, from there, the tradition was that we'd go to Xavier College in Bar, where I did my high school in Xavier College.
All right, now, if I may ask you about an early memory, what's your earliest memory?
My earliest memory, that's a hard one. But you've started with the hard questions first. Let me say, I think it was more to do with discipline in school, really, with the Catholic nuns and priests. Those are things that actually stay with you for your entire life. And I would always recall how strict they were when it came to discipline. It was one of the key things in school when we first attended. And I think that's played a great part of my life since.
Good answer, actually, because you do mention discipline, particularly in schools. And I know for a fact that in the Catholic schools that we attended, discipline was an absolute priority. And I guess that's shaped many of our lives, actually. Moving on, who had early influences in your life?
Well, I mean, first of all, of course, it was my parents, as everyone else experiences. They usually get you started. They lay down the foundations, so to say, for your life. And then, of course, my dad himself, I think he was a great influence in my life as I grew up, and actually what I've become today. And then, of course, like I said, there were nuns and the priests that actually shaped us and kept us in good shape, I must say.
Well, you mentioned your parents, you mentioned your dad. When I look at your union background, I cannot but turn the clock back and think of Uncle Joseph, officially known as Mr. Joseph Anthony, your father, who himself was a staunch unionist. Do you have any memories of your dad's union days?
Oh yes, many. I must say that his work with the workers and the trade unions did have great influence in my life. I started attending union meetings when I was just 12 years old. I would go and sit in and listen to union meetings, and he would be speaking about workers' issues. I would sit in conversations with his colleagues, with his friends, and most of the time it was all union talk. So yes, that's how things developed, and my interest in trade unions, my interest in politics. That's how it sort of grew. I remember I even attended political meetings with him when I was very young, and listened to many great speeches in those days. And unfortunately, you don't hear too many of those these days.
Well, there's a number of reasons why we don't, and just as a background before we move on, Mr. Joseph Anthony was the General Secretary of the Building Workers Union and the Fiji Council of Trade Unions back in the 70s. Well, one question that I must ask you, and I'm sure others would like to know as well, you have something in common with Lech Walesa, the Polish statesman, dissident, and Nobel Peace Laureate, who served as the first democratically elected president of Poland between 1990 and 1995. You must have by now guessed what I'm referring to. Where did that trademark mustache of yours come from?
I've had this ever since it started growing from school. So, and it's sort of stayed. But yeah, and I think it's going to stay as long as I exist. So yeah, that's the way it's been always.
Well, that is indeed a trademark mustache.
Yes.
I was at a prayer meeting last night, and a friend suggested to me, and I know he's watching, but I won't mention his name. A friend said to me, Felix, his mustache looks like Freddie Mercury's, from the lead singer from the band Queen. We'll leave that at that and move on, Felix.
Leave it at the
Folks,
mustache.
folks, you are watching Sashi Singh's Talking Point, the Thinking People's program. Please share this page amongst your family and friends if you can. Our chief guest today is Mr. Felix Anthony. Now, let's look at political aspirations. Let's look at politics. Your political backgrounds, affiliations, appointments, and representations. I understand that you were appointed to the Fiji Senate in 2002. How did this come about?
Well, that was through my membership of the Fiji Labour Party, and as you know, I'm one of the founding members of that party, going way back to 1985, when the then government, Ratumara's government, imposed a wage freeze on workers, and it was the Fiji Trades Union Congress that decided that we needed a political voice to represent workers in Parliament, and not only workers, but workers' interest in Parliament. So that's when we formed the party. There were many good people around in those days, very committed academics, trade unionists. There were others from the business community. It was a great effort. And that's how we worked. We worked tirelessly, and of course, the party won the first elections, and then the rest is history. But uh, my appointment was because of the seats that the Labour Party held in Parliament, and I was an appointee of the leader of the opposition at the time, which was Mr. Chaudhry.
And how would you describe your stint as a senator?
I I saw that there's been a very productive period where we strenuously examined legislation that came through from the lower house of parliament. There were some great debates, and there were open debates. And in those days, I think parliament worked the way it was supposed to work in any democratic country. I can't say that for now. But I believe that the Senate played a very important role, the checks and balances. And of course, not only that, but through the debates that we had, uh, raised public awareness on issues in legislation. And in those days when legislation was passed, it was a very thorough process. Unlike what we have now, where you get bills introduced at 9 p.m. at night and expected to be law the next morning. That never happened in our days. There were very good debates, and of course, in those days, the president of the Senate was also very independent, and you could rely on that independence when you dealt with any bill that came through the Senate.
Then, in the year 2006, parliamentary elections held in May of that year, you were elected to the House of Representatives, representing the Vunda Open constituency for the Fiji Labour Party. As you mentioned, you were one of the founding members of the Fiji Labour Party, a very, very staunch member. However, a short while after the elections, you resigned. What were the issues that were prevalent in the Fiji Labour Party that forced you to resign?
Well, I think if you look at the history of the party, there were many good people in the party. And slowly, if you were to examine, we saw the resignation of a large number of people who resigned from the party for one reason or the other. But I think the main issues that really uh, got people to leave the party was one of transparency, how the party operated, accountability was the other issue. Of course, the one of the other issues that caused a lot of frustration was the fact that the executive committee was stacked up with just National Farmers Union members. And there were many other issues that included maybe leadership as well. But those are issues of the past, and I must say that I was probably the last man standing from the original group of people who were in the Labour Party at the time. So yeah, and you will recall that prior to our resignation, there were a few key management board members who were disciplined by the party at the time and were actually suspended from the party as well. So all this collectively, I think, played a role in that.
Well, still sticking to the past, because past shapes the history and also the future. In January of 2013, the Fiji Trades Union Congress, which really was the backbone of the birth of the Fiji Labour Party, so in January of 2013, the Fiji Trades Union Congress proposed the formation of a new political party in Fiji, the People's Democratic Party. As a vehicle to promote the interest of workers and union, the People's Democratic Party was formally registered in May 2013. What was the thought process behind the formation of this party, and why did the FTUC back this formation?
Well, again, the reasons were more or less the same as the formation of the Fiji Labour Party. The unions were getting a hiding from the government at the time. Life was becoming very difficult for workers in the country, and the workers did not have a voice that they could look up to and stand. While unions did what they could in those difficult circumstances, what the executives and the leadership of the Fiji Trades Union Congress recognized was that the workers needed a voice in Parliament where decisions were actually taken, where laws and policies were written up, and that the workers' interests would be taken care of. That prompted the leadership of the party, of the Fiji Trades Union Congress, to decide at a special conference of the Congress to form a political party. And that's saw the birth of the People's Democratic Party.
Now, in 2014, as I said, you were elected the leader of the People's Democratic Party. What vibes were you getting from the electorate, and what do you think, or what did you think at that time, were the prospects of the party in the forthcoming elections of 2014?
Well, initially, I think we got some very positive vibes from the people, and there were huge number of people that actually supported the party. And I think that was evident when we had our first conference where I was elected as leader of the party. We had a full capacity hall at Gilbert Center, and the support was great. What the party lacked was the funding. Of course, this was a workers' party. We did not have the backing of the business community, of course, and that was one of the biggest drawbacks that we found. We were not able to reach out to the people. Of course, the other challenge that the party had was the media itself. The government at that time actually controlled the media, and they decided what went on and what did not. And of course, the level of intimidation that went on at the time with the media, uh, and also with people trying to uh, become activists for the political party. And then, of course, we had the laws in place where trade unionists or trade unions could not participate in political activity. Again, that restricted the ability of trade unions to fully go out to campaign, to get the message across to the people, to get the workers to understand how important it was for workers to have a voice in parliament. That opportunity was never given to the trade unions. And then, of course, we've had other laws in place where you freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, all this sort of played a role, which made it very difficult for a new political party to actually make some inroads. But let me say, we didn't do too bad. We did better than the Fiji Labour Party in that election.
All right, you mentioned a whole lot of dynamics changing. And under the rules that came about for the 2014 elections, if you were a union official, and which at that time you were, one had to resign. So you had to resign as the General Secretary of the Fiji Trades Union Congress. What did this actually mean to you? Do you think it was fair to impose that sort of restriction?
Well, it is grossly unfair. It's against the Constitution itself when we talk about the right of every citizen to actively participate in the political process. It's against the Declaration, Philadelphia Declaration on rights, political rights of people. But that's the way it was. It was a law that was imposed on the people of Fiji, and the courts would simply follow what the laws said. So we were in a difficult position. I had to resign, which I did, but with the understanding that it was all about the workers. Even if I were to get into Parliament, I would be the workers' voice there, and I could actually probably do more for the workers there than I was currently doing from the outside.
Now, of course, under the 2014 election, that election was fought under a new electoral system and a completely new political landscape in Fiji, the Dehont system of voting. Firstly, what did you think about this system of voting?
I I really think it's the most unfair system that you would have. I mean, look at that system now. You got people with 500 votes sitting in parliament, some even becoming ministers. That's ridiculous. I get more votes in my own union than these ministers get, and the authority that they hold. But it's an unfair system, I believe. I believe that the previous system that we had was more uh, applicable, more favorable to the workers, and it was more democratic. The people directly elected their representatives. And not only that, but under the old system, you had people who would be accountable to their electorate in different areas of the country. You had constituencies, different constituencies. And there, the voters could actually hold their representative accountable and also to get the representative to work in their interest. Right now, this system makes no one accountable to anyone. Simply put, voters at the moment are lost. They really don't know who to go to if they have an issue in their own area, or or to address their needs. I don't believe this serves Fiji well at all, and I'm hoping that we will one day have to review this electoral system.
All right, well, one can live in hope. The second part of that question, the People's Democratic Party failed to win any seats in that 2014 election. What went through your mind when the PDP failed to win any seats?
Well, the first thing that came to my mind was we did not get the message across. We were unsuccessful, and I have pointed out the difficult circumstances that we faced at the time. And what I realized, and what my colleagues realized, was that it would be difficult because we would continue to fight elections in the same circumstances. But more so, I think what's important to understand is that the more political parties you have in the opposition, the more chances of uh, the government winning these elections. The only way that there could be a change in government is if the opposition parties got together. And that's when we made the decision to say, right, we will work closely with Sodelpa and get Sodelpa to try and work with us, taking into account what our manifestos actually said. And of course, they took a great deal of what our manifestos said into theirs, and we worked together. But I think for the future, that is the way to go. The more fragmented opposition we have, the lesser the chances are of any real change in our politics in Fiji today.
So, Felix, you resigned as the leader of the PDP party. What led you to resign?
Well, there is a common understanding that we had, a principle that we held, and that was that if a leader took the party into an election and did not succeed, he'd have to step down. And that's exactly what I did. And I think it's a good policy that every political party should follow. No leader should think that they're there forever. And it's the leader must be held accountable as well, and the leader must be able to take responsibility for the loss or the success, both ways.
On Sashi Singh's talking point this afternoon, live on Facebook, our chief guest is Mr. Felix Anthony, General Secretary of the National Union of Workers and the National Secretary of the Fiji Trades Union Congress since 1999. Well, let's move towards the FTUC, the Fiji Trades Union Congress. Will I be correct to assume that after the 2014 elections, you went back into the union movement one more time?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I
So,
never really left it in the first place, you see.
fair enough. Now, you wear a few different hats in your role as a union man. Rather than splitting your different roles, I'll speak generally about the union movement. However, please feel free to differentiate the different unions if you have to, and if you need to specifically refer to a specific union, please do so. Let us, for instance, look at the Fiji Trades Union Congress. What is the current agenda or modus of operation for the FTUC under the current laws prevalent in Fiji?
Well, we at the moment live in very difficult circumstances with a hostile government in Fiji. So we have had to quite adjust to the current circumstances. But one of the things I'd like to make clear is that the Fiji Trades Union Congress is here to stay. We've had many politicians and so-called leaders who have in the past attempted to wipe out the trade union movement. They have been unsuccessful. Instead, they've all gone. The FTUC has stayed on. And that's the message I have for any other political party or leader who thinks that they can wipe out the trade union movement. But let me also say that the agenda of the FTUC is we have a long agenda. There's a lot of issues in play at the moment, and that starts off with, of course, we don't seek to fight the government. We were seeking to continue dialogue with the government through the tripartite machinery, the Employment Relations Board. That's broken down somewhat now. And the issues that are before the FTUC are numerous. I'll name a few, like the issues of collective bargaining, which is fundamental to workers' rights, and of course ILO Conventions 87, 98. That is being denied to the workers of Fiji, and unfortunately, the government is the biggest culprit. There's absolutely no collective bargaining within the public sector whatsoever. And this is one of the bigger challenges that we have. And I believe that the government ought to lead by example. And this is a bad example that this government is leading by, one of the many bad examples that they have. Quite apart from that is the labor law review, which has been ongoing since 2012. And 10 years down the line now, we're still trying to sort out the labor law reviews. The minimum wage issue is
We'll,
one of
we'll,
the main.
I'll stop you there because I want to explore some of these issues later in the program in a little more depth. For example, you mentioned the minimum wage. I will specifically ask you about that as we progress through the interview. But sticking to the FTUC, obviously, as we've discussed already, the FTUC gave birth to the Fiji Labour Party. Then in 2013, it proposed the birth of the PDP. Where does the FTUC stand in terms of its current support?
Well, the FTUC has not determined any particular party that it would support, but what it is and will do will be to advise its members to vote for any political party that would work for the workers of this country and that would respect workers' rights in this country, fundamental rights, and a government that would be sincere and not say one thing and do quite the other, as we see now. So that's the advice the FTUC will give to its affiliates and its affiliates to its membership. And I think it's now becoming very clear that most of the workers of this country are very frustrated with the current ongoings and the difficulties that are being faced, the many impositions that the government has put in place in regards to workers' rights and the breaches of rights. And of course, one of the greater things of greater importance is the imposition of fixed-term contracts with a clause in it to say that the contract could be cancelled with 1 month's notice. So I mean, that's job insecurity for workers, and these things mean a lot to working families in Fiji. So that's the position that the FTUC holds at the moment.
Now, you've said that you haven't declared support for, or rather endorsed any current political party. Have you received any approaches from any political party? Would you be willing to say that, if you have?
No, we have not, but of course we do discuss issues of mutual concern. And as normal citizens of this country, we are worried at what's happening in this country today. And we recognize that there needs to be a change.
Fair enough. Now, one of our regular viewers, Ben Cush, has sent a question. In fact, there are two associated questions. First question, are you willing to work with Mr. Mahendra Chaudhry and the Fiji Labour Party in the forthcoming elections?
I am not affiliated to any political party, and I do not intend to at this stage.
And the second part of that question was, if not, then why not?
Well, I think it's mainly because of the past experiences that I've explained. Yeah, like they say, you make a mistake once and you make it twice. You make the same mistake twice, you're a bloody fool.
All right. Well, as a follow-up, there's another viewer, Rocky Maharaj, who sent in a question. And Rocky's question is, under the current Fiji First government, trade unions' rights, including the basic right to organize in workplaces, have been suppressed. Would it not be prudent for the union movement to again politically align themselves with the Fiji Labour Party, just like it did in 1984, when work rights were under threat and a wage freeze was imminent, which ultimately led to the formation of the party?
Well, I think the circumstances, the situation has changed drastically since 1985, when the FTUC formed the Fiji Labour Party. It's no longer the same party as we see it. And not only that, but the party itself distanced itself from the Fiji Trade Union Congress. And for those who really don't know, even the National Farmers Union disaffiliated from the FTUC. I think it was in 2007.
Okay, let's move our discussion to some unsavory chapters in Fiji's history. Firstly, during the events of the 2000 coup, you were illegally detained by members of the Tokay movement. What was the background to this illegal detention, if I may ask?
I think it was more political, that some people actually saw me as being disruptive to the then interim government. They did not like us as trade unionists to be speaking up on issues. They did not quite understand what workers' rights or human rights were. I think there was a lot of ignorance, I must say, at the time on this very fundamental issues, and they still are, I must say. So that was the reason why I have been detained, and in fact, I've been detained about 5 times already since '87. So, yeah.
Now, perhaps a very personal question. Were you ever fearful of losing your life in this drama that unfolded in the year 2000?
I have never been sort of fearful of losing my life. I must say this. I've always believed in the cause. I'm very passionate about the cause, and I am thoroughly convinced that whatever I do for the workers of this country is the right thing to do. So I'm prepared for whatever consequences that may come or that may arise from it. And which is why it never deterred me when I got first imprisoned in '87, then in 2000, then after that on 3 other occasions, I was even bashed up by the military.
We'll discuss that, but sticking to this one here. So you've said that you weren't fearful and you stuck to your guns. In this particular instance, in 2000, when you were taken in as an illegal detention, how did you gain your freedom?
Oh, it's difficult to say because, of course, there was a lot of international pressure. Every time I get locked up, I have friends around the world who actually get concerned. And organizations in the international trade union movement, they get into action, so to say. So I would say that it's been the outside pressure that's come in, that every time that I get released, and I really don't know how it works within the interim government when they did take me in, but they seem to be a bit disorganized.
Now, Felix, were there any deep scars, mental or psychological trauma that you faced? And if you did, How long did it take to go away? Or does an incident of that sort and other incidents where you've been taken in haunt you to this day?
No, it doesn't haunt me. It doesn't haunt me at all. I accept this as part of territory. That's part of the job that I do. And I say, well, that's one of those hazards that I have to face. Every job has a hazard. And for a trade unionist, that's one of the hazards that you face. You must be prepared for these issues. I'm quite comfortable sleeping in jail. I'm okay. That doesn't haunt me one little bit. And in fact, to the contrary, it makes me stronger. It makes me more determined. This is a fight worth fighting. So yes.
Spoken like a true unionist. You are watching Sashi Singh's Talking Point, the Thinking People's program, coming your way on Facebook Live with our chief guest this afternoon, Mr. Felix Anthony. Now, moving forward to the year 2006, particularly, as we say, from the coup of 2000, let me move the discussion now to the military coup in 2006, the Bainimarama-led coup on the democratically led government of Prime Minister Laissenyan Rase. Questions that have come into me which have suggested that I ask you this, and first up my question is, did you in any way, shape or form support the events of 2006?
I did not support the events of 2006. Understand that I was also a member of parliament at that time. And because of the coup, I lost my job as a parliamentarian, as a member of parliament. I lost my voice in parliament as a result of that. But that was a fact that took place. And we had to make adjustments. And as the workers' leader, we had to sit back and strategize and say, well, what is the best way forward in the circumstances we find ourselves, right? You will recall that the FTUC was in the forefront of the campaigns in 87 and 2000. We traveled the world, campaigned for democracy in Fiji, we campaigned for human rights. We did all sorts of things, and we got the international trade union movement, we got governments around the world to try and assist. And we spoke to anybody and everybody we possibly could to try and assist us get back to democracy. 2006 was slightly different because one of the things that we had to, and I've never said this publicly, but I will to you, Sashi, is that we had to make a choice. You will recall when the coup happened in December of 2006, the Senate was in session. And one of the bills that was supposed to be passed in the Senate that morning was the Employment Relations Bill. And that was a bill that I and my colleagues in the FTUC worked on for 10 years. We lobbied everybody we possibly could. I was in the lower house of parliament. It went through a committee and, of course, consultations nationwide. And before we got it passed in the lower house. That was a lot of work to do. And we were not prepared. We were not prepared to see that bill be lost in any way after 10 years of hard work. And I will probably later, when I have time, to talk about the impact of that act that came in. So we had to work with the then interim government to say, look, this is important for workers of this country. We need to get this bill into a promulgation, which we managed to do in 2007. And had we not done that, I can tell you today that the trade union movement would not be what it is.
All right, the reason I asked you that question, whether you did support the events of 2006, is that people wanted to know, why would you then be appointed to a number of boards post 2006 coup? Because you were appointed to a number of boards.
Thank you for that question. I think what we need to understand is that the only board that I was appointed to was the Fiji National Provident Fund. And that is a board that belongs to workers of this country. The Provident Fund belongs to the workers of this country. Since the inception of the Fiji National Provident Fund, there's always been a tripartite representation on the board of FNPF. And FTUC has always been represented on that board until when the last Garase government came in, it decided that it would decide who the workers' rep should be on the board. And that's where FTUC had some disagreements with the then SVT government. It broke tradition, it broke the norms, and appointed what it thought should be the workers' rep on the board. And so when we were appointed back to the FNPF board, that was something that we hold, and that's a position we hold today, even today. We have made numerous calls on government, and even as part of our report to the ILO, to say the workers' rep must be on the board of FNPF. Today, the FNPF board is entirely controlled by government and, of course, has become a part of the Ministry of Finance. Or more like it. But let me also say there were a number of boards, others that I was appointed to, like the Natandola.
Coming to that. I'm coming to that.
Yeah, right.
I'm about to come to that.
They were all through my appointment in the FNPF board. And I represented FNPF on those boards. So it wasn't as if I was appointed from outside from those boards. I think that's a misconception a lot of people have, to say, oh, he's been appointed to this board and that. But I represented FNPF on those boards.
Well, that's the beauty about this. That's the beauty about this program, is that we ask the questions that Fijians want to know, and people like your good self have the opportunity of clearing the air once and for all, I guess, to set the record straight. Since we are on the subject of boards, let us discuss this a bit. You served on the Natandola Intercontinental Hotel Project Board as chairman. How much of a challenge was this role?
Oh, that was a huge challenge for me. I mean, as you know, I had no experience in this field at all on hotel development. But what happened was, let me say that when I was first appointed, the project had already started. It was more than a year into work. It was already about $87 million down. And when I first visited the site with my colleague Daniel Uray, there was hardly anything to see after $87 million. And so we labored, we worked, I worked day and night to ensure that we got that project going, we got the hotel standing, we got the hotel open. And not only that, but I think within the process, we saved millions of dollars. And I did state at that time the savings that we made. And not only that, but many of my colleagues, including our auditors, external auditors, commended us for the work that we did at the time. And many said that if we did not get involved in that, that project would have been a disaster, and a huge financial disaster for FNPF, which means the workers of this country. So we believe that we did a great job there. We managed to get the hotel operating, and I think it's been a good success story for FNPF.
I understand that you also served on the telecom board. How did that appointment come about, and how did you find that experience, and what was your highlight serving on that board?
Yes, that appointment came about because of FNPF's interest in Amalgamated Telecom Holdings, which included Telecom and Vodafone as well. And the chairman of that board was determined by the Amalgamated Telecom Holdings Board, because they actually owned Telecom. And of course, FNPF owns majority shares in Amalgamated Telecom Holdings. So that's how that appointment came about. Of course, that was a separate experience altogether. I must say that it wasn't all the time very pleasant because there was a lot of interference from government when it came to appointments of CEOs or dismissals of CEOs. And that made the job very uncomfortable. And I believe that any board that is appointed should be allowed to operate independently of any government interference.
We come back to the FNPF. You were then appointed as a board member of the FNPF. Now, to serve on boards like the FNPF, there is an independent and competency-based selection process, and prospective board members have to comply with the fit and proper person test in accordance with the FNPF legislations. They have to have necessary experience in investments, loans, risk governance, with strong financial backgrounds. Firstly, let me ask you, the appointment to the FNPF board, under whose recommendation were you appointed?
Well, the legislation that you're talking about now has come about lately. And that was put in so to enable government to decide who can sit on the board.
Okay.
And not only that, but was to ensure that there was no employers and workers rep on the board. I think that was the real reason for all those qualifications to be put in. In fact, the board of FNPF ran fairly well. There was no real issues. I think the only real issue that government faced with us on the board of FNPF as workers reps was they were not able to dictate to FNPF the lending procedures and policies. I recall we ran foul with government when just before we got fired from the FNPF board, where we were asked to put aside $500 million for budget deficits, which we refused. We said no. We had a strict policy on loans to various sectors, including government, and government had reached its maximum. So we said we could not do that. And that's what I think pissed off the government to say, well, no, we need our own people to do that. And how best to do it is to make qualifications that would disqualify workers or employers to sit on the board. That's what happened.
But the question was, who recommended you as a board member?
No, the usual request would come to the FTUC. And traditionally, from the inception of FNPF, the president and the national secretary of FTUC would sit on the board. And that's what happened in my case.
All right, and still with the FNPF board, it was reported that you were paid more than $160,000 over 3 years as a board member of the FNPF and its subsidiaries. It has been suggested that both the Prime Minister and the Attorney General attacked you about this six-figure sum board member payment. What was the situation about the payment, and were all board members of the FNPF receiving similar payments?
Yes, that was rather unfortunate and a bit under the belt, I must say. That payment was over 3 years, as you quite rightly say. So you break that down into an annual payment. I sat on all these boards, gave my time, worked hard, and we performed. I wasn't there to do charity. Yeah, that's one. But at the same time, the same Prime Minister and the Attorney General would not tell the public what they were earning, right? What allowances they were receiving, and what was the quantum of those allowances, because they had contracted that out to a private firm. Yeah, they would not tell the public that, but just to make my life difficult, they decided to tell the public this big sum. Forgot to tell the public it was over 3 years. It made it look as if it was something that I got, which I shouldn't have got. So I actually, you will recall, I actually challenged the Attorney General at that time to say, Well, show me what you earn, and I'll show you what I earn, and let's put it to the public, and let the public decide where we stand. Of course, he didn't accept that challenge, but that challenge is still open, even today.
All right. Now, there seemed to be some form of controversy too, was there not? Because my question is, did you rock the boat by saying at that time that there was strong or very strong government influence on FNPF operations? So you may have rocked the boat, and perhaps that may have resulted in the attacks by the PM and AG. I'm not putting words in your mouth. I just wanted a bit of background on that situation as to why there was attack on you, which perhaps led to your termination.
Well, the fact is they could not go and tell the public that they wanted more money out of FNPF, and they were not going to get it as long as we were there. They couldn't tell the public that, so they had to tell the public another story, that would put us in bad light and justify the dismissal of board members. I wasn't the only one dismissed. All the board members were dismissed. Yes, and not only that, but to answer the second part of your last question, the board allowances that we were paid to all board members, and not just me. Yeah, so they
Accepted.
didn't talk about other board members. They just chose me. Yeah, and that was only because I was the leader of the People's Democratic Party. So it was all about politics, and of course, people who don't quite understand would grab that kind of allegations.
Now, you mentioned government pressure or government influences. Let me just explore that for a moment. I also remember you said a little while ago, a few minutes ago, that the FNPF board were expected to set aside something like 500, was it $500 million
Yes.
as a budget safety measure. Now, what sort of government influences were exerted on the FNPF board?
Well, every time the government ran short of cash, I think they looked upon FNPF as the savior, which I think they still do today. We all that transparent now. We don't know what really the the government debt is. I think it's somewhere around 3 billion, but I'm not sure. But that's one of those things. And quite apart from that, there were other political demands, like in boards and in sacking CEOs that did not play ball, or appointing CEOs that were in favor with the government at the time. So these were the things that were in play, and quite often also got involved in policy matters as well. So there was a lot of interference, and there still is, obviously, today.
And I think you've just preempted my next question. There has been so much of criticism on the FNPF in recent times, with people not even sure whether their money is safe or not. What do you see as some of the problems in the FNPF today?
Well, I think the FNPF needs to be more transparent, more open. They need to let people know that what their lending policies are and why they lend or buy government stocks and so forth. And not only that, but I think the biggest issue that people have with FNPF is government got its finger in the FNPF pot, and are they going to empty this before they go? And that's because of the rising debt levels that we see in government now. Not only that, but we also see that it's becoming more obvious that government's running out of cash. Yeah, projects are being slowed down. I mean, look at our water system at the moment; it's all breaking down all over the place, and that's because there's not sufficient investment in that area. And then there are other areas that we see. And of course, more recently, Australia and New Zealand governments have come to our aid with budget assistance. And so that all tells a story about what the situation is, and why people should be worried about FNPF. And not only that, but the other thing that the government has done, which we disagree with, is that every time we have a crisis situation, hurricane or flood or whatever, pandemic, uh, government is quick to advise workers to use your FNPF to assist yourself, and making it sound as if it's them helping the workers of this country, when it's not. It's the workers helping themselves. And the purpose of FNPF is not for those emergencies. The purpose is for a secure retirement. And what do? We today have more than 70, 80% of the members of FNPF who have less than $10,000 in their FNPF retirement funds.
The-
With that kind of saving in FNPF, how do you secure a decent retirement? You don't.
Well said. Now, let us move the subject to trade union movement in Fiji in this current period of time. What do you think is the strength of the unions in Fiji right now?
Well, to be very honest, the unions are going through a very challenging time in Fiji at the moment, and that is, well, of course, we were even prior to the pandemic with the government, with a hostile government in place. But the pandemic's made life much more difficult. As you know, thousands of workers have lost their jobs. Many are working part-time. Many are working shorter hours. So that's become a bit of a challenge. And to make it more difficult, we have some employers who actually take advantage of this situation that they find ourselves now, and try and reduce terms and conditions of employment. They see this as an opportunity. Let's blame the pandemic for all this, and we can get away with it. And of course, as you know, the government overnight, without any consultation, decided that the pandemic was an act of God. Basically, what that meant was the employers were free to hire and fire as they wished, so long as they blamed the pandemic. So this is the situation we find ourselves. So that puts unions in a very difficult position. We've had unions who have lost substantial membership, like, for instance, the Hotel Workers Union, where the hotels were closed. We've had the factory commercial workers, shops, wholesalers, who actually reduced manning levels or reduced hours of work. And not only that, but we've had employers who have actually reduced pay and got workers to work on a casual basis. And in some cases, nothing to do with the pandemic. Nothing to do with the pandemic, but it was an opportunity for them to try and claw back all the gains that the workers made over decades. And many of these gains that the workers made over decades have been, hard fought for. And there were many strikes in those days. Many people suffered before those gains were made. And my friends at the airport know this too well, over the years. And overnight, they lost all this. So it's a huge challenge. We are at the moment sitting back and strategizing as to what the trade union response ought to be. But of course, this is a discussion not only in Fiji, but worldwide.
All right, and let me tell our viewers that I will be discussing specific case studies with Felix as we go down the program, with particular reference to certain disputes that are currently in place, etc. Now, Felix, as we all know, post 2006, new laws have been enacted in Fiji, and some of these laws have had a great bearing on the union movement. How have these laws helped or hindered trade unions in Fiji? What has changed?
Well, as I mentioned earlier on, I think the Employment Relations promulgation, which is now an act, um, has been a positive thing for workers in Fiji. It is not a perfect piece of legislation. Of course, it requires a review, which I talked about. We're 10 years into a review now. But I think one of the key areas that it has helped workers in Fiji, and this is something that I personally fought for, even with my colleagues, was that every worker in this country, regardless of whether they belong to a union or not, must have the right to take up a grievance against the employer through the Ministry of Labor, through the dispute settling machinery, through the arbitration courts or labor courts. That's something that I felt strongly about. You did not have to belong to a union. Under the old legislation, the Trade Disputes Act, a worker could only take up a grievance against his employer if he or she was a member of a trade union. So that's one positive area. And I know many of my colleagues at the time thought that, oh, that would fragment the trade union movement. It did not. It did not. To the contrary, it helped the trade union movement organize better and work harder. Of course, that also meant that trade union leaders would have to work harder as well, and I'm all for it. I'm all for it. So that's just one example that I give. But of course, the law also is based on good faith bargaining, which actually promotes collective bargaining. And it's supposed to actually ensure that workers and employers actually have collective bargaining. And of course, when you have a government that does not follow its own laws, it makes it very difficult. Yeah. Quite apart from that, I think one of the bigger things that under the old law was that for a union to get recognition, to even start talking to the employer, you needed more than 50% of the workforce to be members of the union. If you got 40%, there's no way the employer would recognize you. The new law actually took away that to say even if one worker joins the union, the recognition must be automatic. And that enabled unions to organize better, to get into workplaces, to organize, to get workers, and actually to represent them. Yeah. So that was, I think, a positive move. Of course, there's downside to that, and we're trying to work to plug the holes that we have. But I'm hoping that we can do that through the labor law reviews.
Felix, how united is the leadership of the FTUC today?
I will say very. I will say very. Of course, there's, unity cannot be judged because there's some disagreements on issues. Yeah, we will, as trade unions, we will always debate issues. We will always debate strategies, and sometimes there's disagreement on these issues. But when it comes to FTUC, I believe the leadership and the affiliates are very united. I don't think we've ever been so united. More so with the amalgamation of the Fiji Council, Fiji Island Council of Trade Unions coming in. I think it's worked very well for the FTUC and for the workers of this country. I think it's important that we show that. But I think one has to understand that in the FTUC, we're dealing with leaders of unions. And these leaders are all very strong-minded people. And you are bound to have disagreements on issues. Yeah. And to keep that unity is not easy. It's not an easy job. But I think the leaders understand how important unity is. And if we're going to go out to the workers and say we need to get united, we need leaders to be first united before we can do that to the workers.
Another regular viewer has sent a question, and Nithya Reddy asks, in Fiji, there are wholesale breaches of the Bill of Rights about employment, housing, health, sanitary water, freedom from discrimination, etc. The FTUC has the resources to engage top overseas lawyers or seek the support of unions based overseas. Why hasn't the FTUC taken out a class action against the government?
Well, thank you. I want to thank Nitya for his question. But first of all, thank him for his recent article that he published published. I read that with great interest, and I must say I agree with what he has to say. Uh, I to answer that question that Nitya has posed, I think it is a misconception that FTUC has a lot of resources. FTUC does not have a lot of resources. We scratch the bottom of the barrel all the time. In fact, NGOs have more resources than FTUC has. We don't have funding agencies like AUSAID or other governments who would give money to FTUC to operate. They would rather deal with NGOs because it's politically correct to deal with NGOs than to deal with the workers' organizations. I don't quite understand that, but that is the reality on the ground. We get a little bit of assistance from our colleagues from the ITUC. Again, in these difficult times, every trade union center around the world is facing a crisis. And for the reasons I've already stated, there's been a downturn in membership, difficulties that this pandemic has caused over the last 2.5 years now. And of course, where we have governments, conservative governments that don't support unions, life becomes a lot more difficult. So we don't have the resources to take out a class action. We don't have that kind of money. But let me also say that we our court system is all clogged up in this country. If you were to take any action, you're talking about a few years, 2, 3 years before anything comes to light. And we've experienced that all the time. And that is something that we've also reported to ILO about, to say, we have these disputes. Workers get terminated. We wait for 2, 3, 4 years before we are able to try and address those issues. So, we're facing difficulties on all fronts here.
All right, but very quickly, we've got a long way to go. Would the class action legal challenge be something as a possibility down the road, or in the short term, would you much rather wait to see the outcome of the next general elections?
The next general elections.
All right, well,
What
folks,
answer to
thank you, Felix. You are watching Sashi Singh's Talking Point, the Thinking People's program. We ask the questions that Fijians all over the world need answers to, and my guest today, who's providing the answers, is none other than Mr. Felix Anthony. Felix, let us now discuss your members, the workers of Fiji, union members. What is the impact of the new new industrial relations laws post 2006 on the workers of Fiji? I know you've touched on that briefly. If you could just sum it up, what is the impact?
Well, I think it has had a positive impact on the workers. As I said, it's not a perfect piece of legislation. There needs to be some review of that, which we're working on, and which is also part of the list of things to do for FTUC and a priority. But overall, I think it's it's better than what we had prior to 2006, and that is the Trade Disputes Act, which was a absolute disaster. More so after 2008, when Dan Veitata became the Minister for Labor. He called it the Labor Law Review, but what he actually did was to amend the Trade Disputes Act in such a way where workers' rights hardly existed. So it was very difficult. Of course, the current laws actually, while in one paragraph would state that the workers have the right to go on strike, the other paragraph would actually take it away. Those are some of the issues that needs to be addressed. And there are issues that are with the ILO as well. The ILO has given a whole long list of issues that government needs to address so that the law is consistent with the core labor conventions of ILO. But overall, I think it was a step forward, many more steps to go.
Now, would you say that the Bainimarama government had and still does have an agenda to weaken the trade unions or the trade union movement in Fiji? And if so, why?
Well, it sees the trade union movement as a threat, and I gave the reason before I answered to say yes, they are still at it, and they are trying to exclude the trade union movement from every aspect of any tripartite consultation until and unless they're forced to. Like at the ILO, where they're forced to deal with us. So they have no choice but to deal with us. But coming back home, they prefer not to even talk to us about these issues at all. Not only that, but they impose laws. Like right now, the elections for office bearers of trade unions has to be supervised by the supervisor of elections. What's his business in the trade union movement? Yeah,
Yes.
there's no public funds here. Trade unions are democratic organizations and membership-based organizations. The government has no business in this, and in fact, a violation of the core conventions of ILO. And ILO, in their report, has asked government to stop doing that. Yeah, that's one. Yeah, and of course, then there's other laws like uh, the criminal act that actually makes it a crime to even speak in public openly, as I'm doing now. It's if you're trying to and then the Public Order Act as well. You no right to assemble unless we get a permit from set. So all these restrictions are trying to curtail the trade union movement, trying to the activities of a trade union movement. This is all intentional. It's not. They talk about public security, and but the trade union movement does not subscribe to any form of violence. We don't ever do that. We talk on issues that affect workers of this country, but this government is just simply not prepared to deal with that.
Now, addressing Parliament in February of 2020, during a heated debate, National Federation Party leader Biman Prasad said the Employment Relations Act and political parties' decree limited the rights of trade union leaders in Fiji. He said the government was also breaking the harmony between workers and trade unions. Would you say this is a correct analysis of things in Fiji today, insofar as the workers and unions are concerned?
Oh, yes. Yes, I would agree with Mr. Prasad on this. It is it is very clear what is happening on the ground here, and not only that, but I think what we see is that the government itself is trying to interfere into the work of trade unions itself. It's trying to put in restrictions that the trade unions cannot openly work in the interest of workers, raise issues for that matter. And not only that, but we've seen, for instance, the Fiji Airways experience, the Air Terminal Services experience, the Water Authority, where 2,000 workers were terminated one day. That's the biggest lot of terminations ever in the history of this country. We've never seen that kind of before. And what we've seen is government backing these employers all the way.
All right, well, as I said, we will be looking at those specific case studies like the Fiji Airways employees and ATS, etc. Now, let's look at the cost of living issues, for instance. Average workers in Fiji have struggled through the COVID 19 pandemic. They have also suffered because of the dictates of market forces. Now, in terms of the cost of living, what are your members telling the FTUC?
Our members are telling FTUC that they can no longer make ends meet. Uh, and more and more people are falling behind. They're not able to put decent food on the table. Not only that, but we hear some very sad stories about families having one meal a day or having half a meal a day. And that's the reality on the ground. People are simply not able to afford a decent living. The cost of living has shot through the roof in this country, but minimum wage, as you see, remains at $2.68 an hour. Wage increases are very rare that you would hear wage increases or adjustments coming through. Normally, in the past years, we would have cost of living adjustments on an annual basis where we would try and keep real wage uh, uh, up with the inflationary movements. That's no longer happening. What the government is now trying to impose is to have a productivity pay system or a performance-based pay system to replace cost of living adjustments, and that again is a huge problem for workers. And quite often, any unfair denial of wage adjustments and all that can it's very difficult to address. But uh, this is what's happening, and like we say, there's more about 50% of the population of this country. I'll put it at 50% is either below the poverty line or on the poverty line today in this country, and that's not something that anyone should be proud of. And we will talk about eradicating poverty. We were moving in reverse gear here in Fiji. And of course, this government talks about doing a lot for the people, but that's not happening. In real, what we see is more and more people fall below the poverty line in Fiji today.
Well, last I heard was more than 300,000 people were just below the poverty line. Now, you mentioned wages. Minimum wages, as we know, is $2.68 per hour. The FTUC, I believe, has been running a campaign on increasing the minimum wage to $4 an hour. Can you please expand on this? And do you think employers can afford such a rate of pay?
Yeah, the funny thing in this country is that whenever we talk about raising the minimum wage, there is a group of employers who always come back with the same answer, and that is, this is not the right time. And I've heard this for the last 30 years. And I've questioned them and say, well, when will be the right time to do this thing? And it seems that that right time will never come. Um, what the minimum wage that we have in this country is at a ridiculously low level. And there's no way, absolutely no way, a family can survive on that kind of wage rate. Even if both the husband and wife works, even then, it's not sufficient. The $4 minimum wage that FTUC had set was some 6 years ago. And that needs to be reviewed as well, which we discussed at length in our last meeting. And of course, we say that right now it's more closer to like a $5 an hour minimum wage. Of course, some employers will never be able to afford it. I take the point, it'll be the small employers. But what we've said to employers is that, look, if you can't afford it, you should be able to go to an independent tribunal and prove that you can't afford it. Yeah. And if you can't afford it, that's fine. But you should not stop others who can afford it to pay. And what we find is that we get the bigger boys trying to hide behind the small guys to say, well, they can't afford it. and therefore we cannot pay as well. Now that is unfair. That is unfair.
All right, now let me turn my attention to the unsavory part of being a union leader, a union member, etc. Again, some personal questions. I've seen on television and I've also read in the dailies about union officials, delegates, including you on several occasions, being taken into custody by the authorities. We've addressed this towards the beginning. Why do you think this is happening? That's the question. Why do you think this is happening? Are you and the board members breaking the law, or is it intimidation?
This is pure intimidation. This is simply trying to instill fear in people. That's what it is. And the manner in which it is done. Let me say, the last time when we were arrested, this was after the 2,000 workers at WEF who were terminated. They turned up to work one morning and were told you can't get into the gates. And who were there? It was the police, right? In full riot gear, they're thinking that the workers were going to do something. No, we don't encourage our workers to do anything silly. We don't encourage workers to break the law. Yeah. So they were all turned away and told to disperse. And in the process of dispersing, some were arrested. Just so that others can see that there are consequences if they don't listen to directions. There were others who actually came to the FTUC headquarters and sat down and were decently having a bowl of grog and discussing what was going on. Even the police came there to try and disperse them in full riot gear. The FTUC was surrounded by police. Now, there was no need for all that show. But again, that is how intimidation goes. And when you see that kind of thing, it's hard to believe that Fiji is a democracy. It's not.
Okay, now,
Democracies work.
thank you. Now, there was an alleged offence or incident that took place on 26th April 2019. It was alleged that you knowingly spread broad word of mouth to a journalist, false news relating to the expiry of the Water Authority of Fiji workers' contracts, false news that allegedly tended to create panic. What was the background to this? Was this again intimidation?
The WEF management decided that everyone's contract, 2,000 would come to an end on the 1st of April. No, it was, I think, 1st of May. 1st of May it was. And we challenged that to say that is not true. We objected to that. I called for a meeting with the management, which never eventuated. Of course, they didn't want to talk. I called a meeting even with the chairman of the board. We eventually met a day before my arrest, and we were simply told that, look, WEF does not have the money to continue to employ workers, period. That was the reason given, right? But in terminating workers, there must be a process, and the workers must be treated fairly. And we have, out of the 2,000, some 467 workers who have filed individual grievances against their termination. And those matters are still pending in the tribunals. One is going to be heard on Monday morning coming. That's the first case coming after 2 years or so. Yeah, but
Wow.
That's the reality. That's the reality we face. And we will go through the 400 plus cases. I'm determined to do that as long as it takes. But because I spoke out in opposition to how the workers were treated, it was told that I tried to incite people, I caused anxiety, but the employer was an angel in this case. So I'm still before the courts. I'm on bail, and we'll see what happens.
Yes, so you've said you're still before the courts. You were charged with one count of malicious act, and you're currently on bail. You've been on bail for over 2 years now, and there's no knowing when you'll be brought to trial, or what will happen to your case?
Well, I think the trial is scheduled for October now.
Okay.
I'm not sure of the date as is, but I'm hoping that we can get this over with as soon as.
Well, the wheels of justice in Fiji, I guess, turn slowly. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, it was widely reported not too long ago that the authorities entered your house in Lautoka close to midnight, asked that you accompany them to Suva for questioning. This, I understand, happened in full view of your loved ones. Firstly, is this the same case we are talking about or a different one? And something very personal, and please, it's entirely up to you to answer or not. Being arrested at home in the middle of the night in front of your family, being hauled to Suva, is traumatic to say the least. What sort of toll did this have on your family?
Well, yes, that's true. It's to do with this case. In fact, that's not the first time I've been taken away from home in full view of my family. There's been other instances too where I was taken by the military to the old cemetery and to the new cemetery and all that in the middle of the night. Just all intimidation. It's just all intimidation to just scare you. Now they seem to think that if they did silly things like this, I'd keep quiet. We'll give up on this. No, that's not going to happen. And I hope they understand this, that these things don't work. Of course, it's very traumatic for my family. It just causes a lot of panic. The entire family gets into action and all that. It's been very difficult for the family, I must say. But all I can just apologize to them for the work I do. I mean, this is part of the job I do. That's the reality. But generally, they've become stronger. They've become stronger. They understand where I stand, and they don't punish me for what I do. So so far so good.
Hats off to your family, brave family, to see dad or the hubby taken away in the middle of the night. Now, let me move to what I term a culture of fear, climate of fear. Let us talk about this culture of fear. You've answered that as we've moved along in our discussion today, but specifically, do you think there is a culture of fear being driven by government in regards to trade union activities?
Well, I think it's not only limited to trade union activities, it's also politics as well. You will find many people who disagree with what's happening, but will not want to speak out openly in public. They will whisper to one another, look back a few times, hoping no one else is listening. But that's how it has been over the past years. Same thing in the trade union movement. The workers will come and complain, and quite often we will get this, the final word would be, please don't give my name. Yeah? Mm-hmm. That's the final word we hear all the time. Don't give my name. Yeah, don't tell that I told you this. That's all about fear. One is about losing your job. Two is to be victimized in any way. And you will find that our society in Fiji has changed a lot from where it was over the past years. People are not as open as they used to be anymore. Slowly coming back, I must say, slowly, but too slowly.
All right, now let's look at the right to freedom of expression, the right to protest, the right to strike. Professor Biman Prasad, the NFP leader, said in Parliament again in February 2020, and I quote, he said, "Let's be honest, the trade union movement in this country has been applying for permits for peaceful marches, but they have not even bothered to give a reason as to why the permit for marches has not been granted. I understand the FTUC has applied for permits to hold rallies and or protest marches in the past. What has been the outcome of these applications, and when applications are rejected, Felix, Are reasons given for the actual rejection?
My office actually receives a one-line letter which says your application has been rejected. Period. That's it.
Wow.
That's the response we get. Right? In the last occasion that we applied, I think it was the fifth or sixth time after rejection, I got called to the station by a senior officer who was very nice about it. Who was very nice, offered me a cup of tea, and was very a gentleman. At the end of the conversation, after we talked about the world, he handed me a letter to say it's been rejected. So that's the way it is. And
Well,
and
it's
I
yep.
and I said to him, I said, look, I'm not going to blame you. I know it's not your decision, but that's the way it is. And there's absolutely no explanation at all. But what I can't understand is what is this government scared about? I mean, if it professes to be doing so well for the people of this country, we've had a boom, unprecedented boom in this country. We've had what kind of all kinds of nonsense we hear, and if it thinks it's doing so well, what is it scared about? People should
Well,
love this government.
all right. Well, it seems that on the one hand, the government, as you've just said, professes to respect the rights of workers, professes to, whether it's true or not, yet it denies the same worker their fundamental right to march peacefully. Why do you think there is this denial of freedom of expression? Do you think the government itself, collectively, is afraid of the power of the working man?
Well, I think the government is afraid of its own people. They don't want people to express their disagreement, or they don't want people to be made more aware of what is really going on in this country and the difficulties that are being faced. So it's all about controlling the crowd. It's all about, oh, no, you can't do it because it's for public security. That's all nonsense as far as we are concerned. Like I said, if it professes to be doing very well, it should not be scared. It should not be scared of the people. The people must be free to air their views as they wish. That's what freedoms are all about. These freedoms are not conditional on, or should not be conditional on people supporting the government only. It should also be freedoms that are for everyone equally, right? And these freedoms are not to be given by government. They are our freedoms from birth. Those are things that any citizen must enjoy, and that is freedom of assembly, freedom of speech. Those are fundamental issues. And here we call ourselves a democracy, and yet we can't do nothing here without someone saying yes.
You are watching Sashi Singh's Talking Point, coming your way live on Facebook Live, the Thinking People's program. We ask the questions that Fijians all over the world need answers to, and in our chief guest's chair this afternoon, we have Mr. Felix Anthony. Now, international trade unions, let us look at your comrade in arms abroad. What has been the reaction of the international trade union movements, including the Australian Council of Trade Unions, the New Zealand Council of Trade Unions, on some of the adversities faced by unions in Fiji?
Well, I must say that the international trade union movement has been very active. They've been very helpful. They facilitate whatever our requests are. And that includes the Australian and New Zealand Council of Trade Unions and the Australian Council of Trade Unions. They've been very supportive all along, all the time. And we rely on their support. It's critical because in Fiji, when you can't do much, in Fiji itself, it's important that we have support from our international colleagues. And that's what carries the FTUC today. And ILO level, we have the International Trade Union Confederation fully supporting the FTUC in any and every way that we need their support. So That's been critical to our struggle here in Fiji.
What are your views about the International Labour Organization and Fiji as a member state?
Well, the International Labour Organization, of is an arm of the United Nations, and it's played a critical role in the Fiji situation, where we, as FTUC, together with ITUC, file complaints on various violations. And we've had the governing body of the ILO examine the complaints. The committee of experts at the ILO have examined the complaints and have issued a number of reports over the years and has urged Fiji to try and remedy the violations by amending laws or repealing laws that the government has imposed, and they include labor law reviews, issues of intimidation, the Public Order Amendment Act, the and the restrictions that have been placed, the Political Parties Act on trade unions as well. So they have been very helpful in that way. The office in Suva of the ILO is also trying to assist in any way they can. Of course, they can't actively be part of the trade union activities, but they try and get the message across that this government has an obligation to respect the international labor conventions, more particularly those that are ratified by this government and those that are the core labor standards. That is the bottom line, and the ILO is attempting to do its best. Of course, the last 2 years have been difficult. We have, after the last governing body, it was decided 2 years ago that we would have a context mission, an ILO mission from Geneva, to come to Fiji to examine the current situation and report back to the governing body. That hasn't taken place. Hopefully, it will take place this year after the travel restrictions are uplifted. And again, once again, we will try and get the Fiji situation back on the governing body agenda to see how we can address that. But what we also see is that the government is very good and quick to go and give a very rosy picture of what's happening in Fiji. Oh, everything's okay, workers' rights are respected, collective bargaining is well and alive, and all that. But the reality is quite different on the ground. And they're very quick to make commitments that they will respect the workers' rights, they will respect collective bargaining, and so forth. They will do that. But when they come home, they seem to lose it somewhere on the way. They forget to act when they get home.
Now, are there any current ILO reports on Fiji? And if so, what do these reports say? Perhaps a little briefly, just as a synopsis.
Yeah, all these reports say quite a bit. They say a lot about Fiji and what the government needs to do. There's a list of almost 20 issues or more that they talk about, and of course they talk about trade union rights. And of course, the first thing they said in the most latest report is that they should drop charges against myself, and that's basically intimidation. And they should not. No trade union leader or worker should be charged for such actions. Quite apart from that, they talk about the behavior of the police force and the armed forces. And they recommend that they ought to be training on human rights for both these organizations in Fiji. Respect of rights of workers to choose their representatives. We don't need the supervisor of elections to come in and try and do elections for us. He's got no business in this thing. Review of labor laws to be in compliance with core standards. There ought to be no interference in trade union work. And the list goes on. The right to strike, essential services. I mean, this government has classed essential service a whole lot of industries. That includes Fiji Airways as essential service, includes the banks, includes the municipalities. So even a gardener at the municipal council is an essential service. So these are the kind of ridiculous kind of laws that we have in Fiji, which ILO says you can't. Essential services under the ILO meaning must mean any industry that is a threat to life, right? And
Okay.
that includes like the health, electricity, water, that sort of thing. But none of this, the banks and all that, they all become essential service. So once you become essential service, you enjoy privileges, and the workers' basically rights are diminished to a minimum. So the list goes on. There's, it's about collective bargaining. It's about child labor. It's about the crime decree that they put in, Public Order Amendment Act. So they've listed down a whole lot of clauses that this government needs to relook at, to either repeal or review, to change so that they're compliant with the core conventions of ILO. So I don't want to go through that. That's going to take us the whole afternoon.
That's fine. You've given a gist of that. That was the report. Now, are there any violations listed by the ILO in relation to Fiji?
Oh yes.
And if
Oh yes.
and if so,
They
and
are.
if so, pardon me, and if so, what are the main violations?
The main violations are those that talk about the right to collective bargaining. That's one, right? That's part of the freedom of association, the right to collective bargaining, freedom of assembly, freedom of speech. These are fundamental human rights issues. So they are the violations that they're mostly concerned about. And of course, the level of intimidation that goes on in the country. So these are some of the things. And of course, the denial of political rights to trade unionists and trade unions. Yeah. While businesses are free to get involved in politics, workers, trade unions can't. Yeah. So all these issues are key issues, and but the report can be found on the ILO website. If you just go onto the ILO website, plug Fiji, and it's all there. The most recent one just came out, I think, a few weeks ago, a couple of weeks ago. But
All right.
it's quite comprehensive, and deals with a whole host of issues. And
Now, Felix, sorry, go
and I
ahead.
think Fiji ought to be proud of it.
Thank you. Now, is there a United Nations periodical report on Fiji? And if so, what does that say?
Yes, that's interesting. The Fiji, there is a UPR, we call it, Universal Periodic Review of Fiji, where Fiji goes and gives a very rosy picture of how good things are in Fiji and what's happening in Fiji, and everything's well and good. But the report itself, I think, is damning. So we've had numerous countries in this report who actually uh, urge government to try and ensure human rights are fully observed in the country. There's numerous, and I won't go into each one of them, but there are others that talk about workers' rights, talk about Public Order Amendment Decree, talk about the same issues, the freedom of assembly. And governments have urged Fiji government to act on that. And the beauty is that Fiji accepts most of these recommendations. I think out of the 255 or something, Fiji's accepted almost 200 something already to say, yes, all good, we can do it. Uh, yeah. But nothing happens back home. And then in the last instance, when all these recommendations were given, Fiji indicated it would accept most of the recommendations. And the United Nations representative congratulated Fiji. Well done. But we see nothing happening at home. So
They
I think
seem,
it was a mature that the UN should start congratulating a country before any action is taken.
well,
But that's how it happens, and that's how it happens. And yeah, so we just got to live with that and continue regardless. We go back to the same people and tell them, look, nothing's happened. Yeah.
okay, well, looking at let's look at the tripartite forum. Looking at parliamentary reports from last year, February, the opposition MP, Lenora Ngeringirin Tambua, told the House the tripartite agreement was not working. The agreement was signed in 2015 between the government, the Fiji Commerce and Employees Federation, and the Fiji Trades Union Congress to ensure smoother employment relationship. Now, Ms. Ngeringirin Tambua said in Parliament, and I quote, "The unions, I believe, are boycotting the Employment Relations Advisory Board, ERAB, because government is not complying with the timelines in respect of the review of labour laws, an essential national industry decree." However, the Attorney General, Ayaz Sayed Qayyum, said the union's refusal to participate in the ERAB was political. Let me ask you, does Fiji still have a tripartite forum?
Let me answer that in a different way. To say, look, what the Attorney General in his response forgot to tell people is that the reason why the FTUC walked out of the tripartite forum, and that is because the government employed a consultant to try and determine a minimum wage. We had, I think, 2 5-10-minute meetings with the consultant. We disagreed. What the government attempted to do was to bring that report to the tripartite Arab board to get us to rubber stamp it and say $2.68, what an achievement. No, we refused. We said we will not be part of a tripartite forum that simply expects us to rubber stamp any report that the government gives. That's when the FTUC walked out of the tripartite forum. But in terms of the labor law review, we have always participated in that review. We have always participated in that review. We've called on government numerous times to get this going. The agreement was signed in 2015. We revisited it in 2016 to say, hey, get going with this thing. You have missed the timelines. This was all supposed to have been done in 2015. We signed another agreement in 2016. It's now 2022. And we're still trying to talk about that. Now, that's the kind of commitment we see from government. And yet they have the audacity to go to Parliament and give, false, that we don't want to talk about it. That's absolutely not true.
So, your response to the Attorney General's comments that the unions refused to participate in Arab was political, what do you say?
No, it's not political at all. There's nothing political about that. Simply because we didn't rubber stamp your minimum wage submissions does not mean that we're political. No, we disagree in principle with $2.68. We've been talking about a $4 for the last 6 years.
Yes.
Right? I mean, can't you see the difference between $2.68 and $4? And how could you possibly call that political? No. Right? And yet we have the same government telling people, the NCDs, the diseases are so high, live healthy and all that, and pay people $2.68. How does that work? How do people live healthy when they can't afford healthy food?
Well said. Now, as I've been saying, this is the time I'd like to look at some case studies with you. The first one, the Water Authority of Fiji, and as you referred to it, there was termination of something like 2,000 workers in 2019. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Now, you were arrested in regards to this. You mentioned this earlier, that it was intimidation. What was the final outcome in this matter? I believe you said the first case is coming up in the tribunal on Monday.
on
Is
Monday.
this the whole essence of it, that the cases now start rolling from Monday?
From Monday. That's the first case. And
Wow.
there's a total of about 467 cases filed. We're hoping to go through all of them.
Now, Felix, when you look at a figure like 2,000 workers, and this happened in 2019, what did happen to those 2,000 workers? Of course, 400 odd are taking their matters to the tribunal, but what about the other workers?
Well, you see, this is what happens when workers are intimidated. They refuse to come forward. Yeah, they refuse to come forward and to say, "Well, look, I want justice in this issue." They just simply disappear into thin air, and most of them continue to be unemployed right now. Very few have been re-employed on short-term basis, 3-month contract or 6-month contract, and that's what the Water Authority of Fiji does these days. Despite the union being there, they still continue to offer these short contracts to workers on a 3-monthly or 6-monthly basis. And of course, we had also one of the reasons that we understand is that there's not sufficient budget for projects with WEF. Government has withdrawn what some of the budgeted funds that were put in place for projects and maintenance work, simply because they needed money elsewhere. So that means workers continue to stay out of work. So, and one of the things that really is surprising is that we have not had one word from government on what they intend to do about workers who have lost their job. No word at all. And yet, this is the government that talks election time about caring for people. Same people.
Second case study, Fiji Airways. Let us look at the case of Fiji Airways flight attendants. And again, please correct me if I'm wrong. I understand that a total of 430 Fiji Airways flight attendants were terminated from work because of what was stated as, and I quote, impact of COVID-19. My question to you, was this the only reason, or what were the reasons for termination by the government? Why the termination?
Well, see, the surprising thing in this is that we don't believe that that is the real reason for the terminations. The workers in Fiji Airways or the unions had repeatedly requested for meetings with management to try and find a way that workers would continue to be employed. And this, they were even prepared to stand down without pay and wait until the situation improves. That was never considered by this management. This management overnight decided that it was going to terminate people. Many of the workers in Fiji Airways received a text message or an email to say, "You're terminated. Come and pick up your letter, return your uniforms." That's as simple as that. That's how inhumane this employer is. Yet, this is the same employer that talks about Fiji Airways being the family, we're the face of Fiji, we're a team. And more recently, I saw advertisements for the same jobs saying, "Would you like to join the Fiji Airways team again?" When when the going gets bad, there's no family, there's no team, there's nothing. Yeah? You discard people as if they're just a piece of paper, right? And yet, when things start improving, you start talking about the team. You start talking about the Fiji Airways being the face of Fiji again. This is hypocrisy to the highest, yeah. And we deplore this kind of behavior of employers, and that's one of the worst examples that I can see in the recent history of a behavior of employer, and it's all been condoned by this government. Not a word from this government. That when workers have approached government on this, they simply get told, "Oh, it's the board of Fiji Airways that deals with this. They have no say in it." Yet they appoint the board.
And still staying with the Fiji Airways case study, I understand the matter is currently before the court. What are the key main issues in court? What are the key main issues at stake?
Well, at the moment, I think the courts are dealing with just the preliminary matters. They're not even into whether the terminations were fair and just or right. They're dealing with the preliminary matters where the employers made an application to say they did not follow the procedures laid down and therefore the matter ought to be struck out. Yeah. But this is a strategy to just simply delay and delay and delay as long as they can, hoping that the workers will give up one day. That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. Fiji Airways is going to have to come back one day and deal with this situation. And, it really should be ashamed of itself, the way they have treated workers in Fiji Airways.
Felix, looking at the third case study, air terminal services, I would like to look at ATS now. If you could please tell us what were the main issues there and whether the ATS matter has been resolved so far.
Well, the ATS is no better than Fiji Airways. Yeah, they're just as bad in terms of how they treat people. In the ATS situation, the union had actually written to management to say, we can work free for you, or we can go all on leave, unpaid leave, until such time you're ready to get back to work. They didn't. They saw it as an opportunity to try and get rid of the union in ATS, to try and get rid of the collective agreement that they had with ATS. And I think one of the things that's even worse in ATS is the fact that the workers in ATS actually own 49% of the company. They actually own 49% of the company. And yet they've been treated as if they're nobody. The government actually decides who should represent workers on the board of ATS. The last time the workers elected some people to sit on their board, the government reps decided that they weren't fit to sit on the board because there was some kind of conflict of interest. Yeah. So even that, the government has usurped their rights and powers in the ATS to have their say. And you would think that if the workers had 49% shares in ATS, they would be treated with a little bit more respect than they have. That's not the case. Unfortunately, it's government that decides what happens in ATS as well. And that's the sad story today. And again, they're now advertising for people to whether you want to join the ATS. And I really think the entire management of both Fiji Airways and ATS should go. That's not how any employer ought to treat workers, and more so when they're both government controlled.
Listening to you, it just seems that there's a lot of contempt against workers. Now, if I may ask you, since the election of this current government in 2018, since they've come back in power with a reduced majority, roughly, if you could tell me, how many workers in Fiji have been affected by employment terminations? Thousands?
Thousands. It would be in the thousands. It would be in many thousands, I would say. Yeah, I'm talking about just Fiji Airways and what's that. But over this period, thousands of workers have lost their jobs. And many where there aren't unions, they have no say, absolutely no say. No one fights for them. They don't have the courage to take up a grievance on their own and represent themselves, so they can't afford a lawyer to do it. So they simply accept the decision and try and move on. And there aren't many job opportunities, so to say, for people to go to, particularly now. So many of them remain unemployed. And as you can understand, social problems increase. There are all kinds of issues at the moment.
Thank you. Now, another viewer question as we go to the home stretch. Another question sent by a viewer, Nasi Radhada, who asks, in this new era of modernized technology and the workplace being affected by the global pandemic, has there been any new or revised laws and regulations introduced by the government to assist and benefit the workers in Fiji?
No, there's been no laws that have been introduced, and I think you can actually forget about this government having any intentions of assisting workers. I think that expectation may be too much.
Let's look at the government of Fiji v. the workers, the employees. Question I had, and you've already answered, and that was the government stance on workers on Fiji, but I'll move on. How frustrating is it to deal with the government on workers' issues? You know, as I watch you, as you speak, I can sense the frustration. It's like knocking your head against a brick wall to represent your union members fight for their basic civil rights. How frustrating do you find this?
Well, I'm glad you can see the frustration in me. It is very frustrating, but at the same time, I think on the other hand, it makes us more determined. We will continue this, no matter how long it takes. But it's not something that's going to be swept under the carpet at any one time, anytime at all. We will continue. But the whole idea is that we don't give up on these issues. And that's something that I can assure workers, that the trade unions in Fiji don't forget, they don't give up.
We've discussed the minimum wage, currently at $2.68. The unions fight to take it up to $4 or $5. Do you see in the foreseeable future that the plight of Fiji's workers will improve, that they do get more dollars in their pockets at the end of a working week, or are we just fighting against a very, very stubborn outfit there?
Well, I'm not optimistic, I must say, if you're talking about the near future. But I'm hoping that we get a government that is going to be more, will be more caring and will understand the plight of the workers of this country, the poor people, those that live below the poverty line, and do more to assist this group, to lift them, not only up to the poverty line, but above the poverty line, that they earn a living wage and a respectable life. That's something that we all dream of, but we're going to continue to press and work on that. That's definitely something that we want to see. I'm not optimistic that this government will do it, unless, of course, they want to win the election. They might do something for a short while, or give another $300 to people. That's what they usually do, and that's what some of our people fall for. But I'm hoping that we will do something more substantial than that.
Well, something tells me this time around a lot of people are much, much wiser, but I could be wrong. Now, Felix, you have been a workers' representative for almost 40 years. You've seen many governments come and many governments go. We've discussed that in this present political climate, the present political landscape that we have, there's a fear of apprehension. There's what I call the culture of fear. And you've said it does exist. Others have said it does exist. Do you have an opinion on the subjugation of workers' rights? I mean, why would a government try to do that to workers who really become the backbone of the country's economy, so to say?
Well, have you seen the list of donors for this current government? Political
Yes, I have. I've read that.
That could be a reason. Yeah, the people who give the money have the say. Yeah, the poor people can't give money, so they don't have a say. And it's unfortunate that our politics works that way. And I understand that works in many other countries as well.
Yes, indeed. Okay, home stretch. Let's discuss the issue of rights. Is there any right to carry out wage bargaining in Fiji currently?
Well, in the private sector, where there are unions, we attempt to have collective bargaining. We attempt to do that. Let me say it's not easy. It's time consuming. In some cases, it's taken us a couple of years before we get anything done. In other cases, we've gone to the tribunals to get assistance, and even that takes a few years before we get anything done. But on paper, yes, we have that right. In reality, it's almost impossible at the moment. That's my experience that we see in terms of collective bargaining in Fiji at the moment.
Staying with rights, is there any right to strike to seek industrial action?
There is rights in the legislation for industrial action, but there is a process that you follow, and the government usually frustrates that process, so you can't complete the process, and therefore you can't go on a legal strike. So the short answer to that is, while it's on paper, in practice, it's almost impossible. And that's one of the things that the ILO report talks about.
Okay. Now, given the present political landscape in Fiji, are trade unions still a force to be reckoned with, or because of all the pressures, because of all the sanctions, the trade unions are a shade of their former self?
No, I believe that the trade unions are still in a very strong position. I think many trade unions have good leadership that will see them through this difficult period. And I think out of all this, the trade unions will come out much stronger than we have been. So far, we've done fairly well, and we're holding on. We're going to take on this struggle. And let me just say that if anyone thinks that the trade unions are going to disappear, that won't happen. That will never happen. The trade unions are here to stay in Fiji. We've taken good root of this. We have good coverage of trade unions in this country, and that's we will only get better as time goes on.
Now, insofar as Felix Anthony is concerned, what is the way forward for the workers of Fiji and the trade union movement?
Well, the way forward for workers in Fiji, the first of all, and my message to the workers is that, look, first of all, elect a government that would care about you. Yeah, you and your family. That's what it's all about. We don't look at members as individuals. We look at members as being one family. Yeah, every time a member gets terminated, that's one family being impacted. And that's how we see the membership. And we call on our membership to ensure that when it comes to choosing a government, choose a government that's going to look after you. Don't choose a government that is going to be against you all the time, as we have seen, and then come to the unions and question the unions as to what the unions are doing about it. That's not how it works. Yeah, we need a truly democratic Fiji, and it's up to us as the people, as citizens, to make it really democratic. So that's the way forward. That's number one. Number two is that what we need to do, and I've impressed this on our trade union leaders, is that we need to organize workers into unions. And we must ensure that workers understand that it is their fundamental right, the freedom of association, to join a union. It is their fundamental right to collective bargaining. Right? It's not a favor that's been given by government or by employers. Yeah. So exercise these rights, right? And that's what we're working towards, is to try and create that awareness, try and create awareness about rights, human rights, and not only that, but to educate our workers. That's something that the FTUC will continue to do. And I think one of the other things that I think we need to put on the agenda is social protection for our people. I think this pandemic has exposed one thing, and that is that there is no social protection for our people when it comes to natural disasters or this pandemic. There's no help other than the FNPF, which they help themselves on. And this government giving $200 or $300 once in a while, that's no help. Right? That's not going to sustain people to have a decent living. So these are some of the things that we will want to concentrate on. And of course, the way forward is that also is that there must be dialogue. There must be dialogue between the social partners, that is the employers, the government, and the trade unions. That's essential. No one alone can solve the problems that we face today in Fiji. There must be this dialogue so that we can all work together. After all, we all want to do good for the people of this country. That's the bottom line. And it's not about I'm not going to work with him or work with her. It's not that. So there needs to be a recognition that social dialogue is critical in these difficult times.
Now, you've summed that up very, very nicely. You've been a unionist, as I've said a couple of times, for close to 40 years. You've been a parliamentarian. You just touched on democracy. My question to you is, democracy in Fiji, is it truly a democracy, or in your opinion, it's just a facade of democracy? We're just going through the motions. What do you think?
Look, democracy is not only about having an election and telling the world, oh, we had elections and this is democracy, right? Democracy, that's only a small part of democracy, yeah? The other part is actually behaving like a democracy. It's actually ensuring that you continue to listen to people, yeah? Your actions in parliament. Look at our parliament today. Is this democracy? Really? The way I see parliament, it's a waste of time, really. And to be honest, because the way this government behaves in parliament, it's all about numbers. They bulldoze anything they want into parliament, restrict debate, use standing orders 51 as often as they possibly can to just bulldoze anything through parliament, not allowing proper debate, proper consideration, proper consultation with the people, the stakeholders. No, none of that. It's more like a dictatorship. That's what it is, right? And that kind of behavior can never be classified as a true democracy. And I'm hoping that that's going to change.
All right, and talking about government, there have been widespread talk of corruption and nepotism in government. Is this a reality or just an imagination? What are your thoughts? Do your workers, do your members actually complain about corruption and nepotism in government?
Well, there's complaints all over the place. It's very hard to try and prove these things when you have a government that is not so transparent. You probably would have noticed that every time there's criticism of government, rarely do government respond, particularly
Yes.
when it comes to nepotism or corruption. There's hardly any real response from government. A truly democratic government would call for open investigations, independent investigations, wherever there is any allegation of corruption or nepotism. But no, not in Fiji, right? We have FICAC, but they pick and choose who they want to take on, right? They don't take everybody on. We've seen that time and again. And I think when it comes to nepotism, I don't need to have a view on that because you can see it, right?
All right, well,
Up there.
yes, I think you've answered that very, very well. Now, few more questions, and I'll let you go and have lunch. Health, high cost of living, poverty, housing, education, unemployment. These are day-to-day issues, day-to-day concerns of hundreds of thousands of people in Fiji. Are your workers, are your members expressing the same sort of frustrations, concerns to you?
Very common, very common. I think when you talk about health, it tells a story when our leaders, our government leaders get sick, they prefer to go overseas. Yeah, they don't trust their own health services here. why should the common man trust our health services here? Yeah, that's. I think that tells the story. I think concludes. It's a conclusion that you can draw. Our health services is going down the drain. You hear that complaint all the time. In fact, very common. You hear, please, when you get sick, don't go to the hospital or you'll die.
Yes.
That's a common thing that we hear from people. Yeah, in terms of poverty and all that, it's a very sad story, and I think our government, government MPs have gone blind to that, and simply try and ignore that and accept it as that's that they've accepted it as a norm, and that's sad.
All right, Felix, will we see you contesting the coming elections?
No.
Why not?
I think I can serve the workers better in my current role. One. Two is I don't want to go into a parliament that does not really is not really democratic, and you cannot have a decent debate on issues that you should, and I've seen the performance of this parliament. I give all credit to the persistence of the opposition team in parliament. I know they're just as frustrated as I am inside, and I'm outside, but I think I can do a lot better to serve the people. At the end of the day, it's about serving the people. It's not about holding a position. So, if I can do something better where I am, let's do it.
Okay, and finally, if I may ask you, is there a message from you to your union members today?
Elect a good government that's going to take care of you.
All right, well, ladies and gentlemen, shortly I will reveal our chief guest for next Sunday. However, at this juncture, Mr. Felix Anthony, General Secretary of the National Union of Workers and National Secretary of the Fiji Trades Union Congress, thank you very, very much for being chief guest on Sashi Singh's Talking Point today. Felix, I appreciate you taking time to discuss in a very forthright manner, I must say, matters pertaining to your workers, the workers of Fiji, and the struggles of the union movement, including your own personal struggles in terms of your detentions, etc. It has been a pleasure to gain an insight into the way things happen in Fiji from your perspective, from the perspective of the union movement itself. May I take this opportunity in extending an open invitation to you and to your union colleagues from affiliate unions to appear in this program, Sashi Singh's Talking Point, as Fiji gets ready for election 2022-2023. There's so much to talk about on education, on health, town and city matters, on day-to-day matters. So my invitation to your union affiliates is definitely open. Thank you very, very much, Vinaka Vakalevu, to you for an ex-St. Thomas School old boy. You've done very, very well indeed.
Thank you so much, Sashi, for having me.
Look, thank you, and my interview with you today was an eye-opener. I certainly hope you've had a good session with me this afternoon.
Enjoyed it. I enjoyed it, and I hope I wasn't too forthright, but you got to say it the way it is. Huh?
Well, I expected nothing less from you. And like I said, I have thoroughly enjoyed this. It's been an eye-opener. Thank you, Felix. God bless you, and look forward to talking with you soon.
Thank you so much. You have a good afternoon.
Cheers, and same to you. Well, let me just say, people have been writing to me, and they've been messaging me, wanting to know when will the Attorney General appear on the program. When will the Attorney General appear on the program? No one else, just the AG. Let me just say, nothing, zilch, kuch nahi, from the Fiji First government side in terms of accepting my invitation to participate on Sashi Singh's Talking Point. the invitation stands. Our efforts on the SSTP program will continue. We will continue to bring to the people of Fiji what makes the news. We will continue for as long as you want to participate in the program. Remember, we ask the questions that Fiji wants answers to. Fijians want to know. Well, that is all for episode 9 for now on Sashi Singh's Talking Point. A big thank you to my regular contributor, Nikhil Singh, for his input on the matters discussed today. Nikhil, thank you very much for the background research as well. You're truly a good team player. To my technical producer, Vin Shandal, a very big thank you to you as well. I would like to thank our viewers for watching this program. Now, to next week. Who do we have as our chief guest for next week? Well, the big reveal is on now. Our chief guest for next week is renowned Fiji lawyer, Mr. Richard Naidu. Yes, indeed, Mr. Richard Naidu is going to be our chief guest next Sunday on Sashi Singh's Talking Point. If you have any questions for Mr. Richard Naidu, you can privately message me on the SSTP page. Please ensure that you send these by close of business on Thursday. I work on the program during the weekend, and if I can get your questions by close of business on Thursday, well and good. Like I said, please like and follow the SSTP page so that you can get instant notifications of the posts. And I wish you all a very safe and blessed week. In closing, like I normally do, I leave you with this quote for the week from Alice Walker. No person is your friend who demands your silence or denies your right to grow. I repeat, no person is your friend who demands your silence or denies your right to grow. Therefore, choose your friends carefully, choose your leaders carefully, choose your government carefully. The choice is yours to make and yours alone. I am Sashi Singh, bidding you all a very good afternoon, and like a quizmaster used to say years back, goodbye, namaste, and ni samode.